Allred, August 4th, 1967. His office in Brigham City. Mr. Allred, could you tell me when you first had contact with the Washakie Project?
I visited the Washakie Project with Bishop M.O. Ashton of the presiding bishop's office, presiding bishopric of the LDS Church, along in the fall of 1938. I made this visit upon their invitation to see if they might employ me as a farm supervisor of that project, which I accepted and went to work for them in December, but didn't really get there until the first of the year, 1939.
What were conditions like at Washakie when you went there?
Conditions, frankly, from an economic standpoint, were in a terrible condition, terrible shape. The church had employed a man 10 years earlier than my arrival there, Joseph Perry, who was acting as the bishop there and had come down from Marriott, who was entitled or was allotted a certain amount of church property to use to farm on, but who wasn't a farmer. He rented the property out to the white folks nearby from Portage and Plymouth, and used this money, plus a little money from the district school board, driving a bus, small bus, to carry the school children in, and then any other funds that he could find provided his living. He had, however, made an effort right at that time to buy equipment. We had just passed through, the Great Depression of the early 1830s. And he had made up his mind that he was going to try to farm actually some of this land on his own, but hadn't quite gotten around to it. He did, however, had bought some equipment. The Indians were allotted certain portions of the LDS land, and they too had followed suit by renting the allotment they had to the white men. There was one fine brother, however, Moroni Timbimbu, who became the first Lamanite or Indian bishop of the church, who was working and farming on his own, some of this church land and some of his own farmland, some that had been handed down to him. I said one, there were really two. The other one was Henry Wansop. These two men had acted as counselors to Bishop Perry in the bishopric, and they were doing a fair job. Prices were depressed, agricultural prices, and things just weren't in too good a shape.
How was the ward or the branch of the church there when you came?
The branch of the church was supervised by Bishop Joseph Perry, and with his two counselors, Moroni Timbimbu and Henry Wansop, had recently worked on a chapel and had completed this chapel, a small brick building there. It wasn't dedicated until some few months after I was there. But they'd had a hard time. They'd had moral problems that the bishop had tried to correct, and many felt that he hadn't used the right method in trying to correct these principles. He had used the law and sheriff and courts to try and insist upon marriages that the Indians said were married, individuals were married in an Indian way, as they called it. And they said they practiced these principles for generations, and they didn't want to be interfered with by the white man.
When you first came to Washakie, what was the basic philosophy behind the project?
The basic philosophy behind the project, as near as I could determine from the presiding bishop's attitude, was first to raise the moral standard of the people.
When you say morals, could you be more explicit? You mean a man and a woman living together out of wedlock, or a man that is of low morals, he was dishonest, or a combination of all of these things?
It's a combination, really, of all of them, and they felt along with this. Here was some 1,800 acres of good farmland that could be utilized so that the source of income could be used to raise the economic standard of the red man, and then teach him along in church the moral standards. They were anxious that this people get actively engaged in making a living, and this in itself would help them improve the moral standards.
Then the basic philosophy in essence then was to impose or help them to learn the white culture value system of working, providing for their families, being somewhat independent, and adhering to the LDS moral code, so on and so forth.
I guess that's a good way of putting it.
Mm-hmm. When you first went there, you made mention that the farm was in bad shape, that the people were not utilizing their land, they were doing a lot of renting. What were some of the things that you did to try to improve the situation?
The first thing that we did, I say we because I didn't do it, I had a committee appointed to assist me in making decisions. It was a committee of five high councilmen from the High Council of the Malad Stake. Was to provide a source of income for each family throughout the year. And I guess I could say I was guilty of coming up with the idea of actually hiring the Indians. We asked them to give up their allotted piece of ground, and we would operate it as one unit. We couldn't justify buying equipment for each small subdivision. We would buy the equipment, and they would have a source of income. We'd hire them. At that time, $2 a day, half of which was scrip. And they could work as long and as often as they wanted. They could work every day, or they could work as long as they cared to, and then go to town and do what they wanted. We were anxious to provide them with this. We began by first providing a lot of hand labor. We started out to raise sugar beets. There had been some sugar beets raised there, but very few acres. And it was only about the second or third year that I was there that we actually contracted and planted about 100 acres of sugar beets. And the Indians liked this. It meant that the families could get out and do the thinning and hoeing, weeding, and so on. Every member of the family could participate, and it was a good source of income. And in those days, they harvested the beets by hand. We had trucks so that we could haul them, and it was a pretty good thing.
You made mention that in providing work, you paid them $2 a day, which $1 was in scrip to be redeemed, I guess, for supplies.
Mm-hmm.
Could an Indian family live on that?
Yes, we could hire white people for that price. They were anxious. In fact, we had to use the white people when the county fair was on or Peach Days was on. The Indians didn't have the urge to want to work when some celebration nearby was on, and we were required when very often the harvest would be on, and we would have to then resort to the hiring of Indians, and or white people, and we would hire them at the same price. They thought at that time it was a good rate of pay.
How long were you at Washakie?
I was there 7 years.
Did you see an improvement in the Indian as workers, as church members, as people becoming independent during the 7-year period?
Oh, I'm sure. And we had many active men and women who, after this period, showed little interest in the church. We organized first a social program in the MIA. I became the president of the Mutual, Young Men's Mutual Improvement Association, and we organized. They'd always wanted to participate in athletics and compete with the white men nearby. And with my right-hand man, who was Grant Perry, Bishop Joseph Perry's youngest son, participating with them. I just graduated from college, and we had a basketball team. And these boys had noticed the activity of the Negro ghosts and so on, and it wasn't very long until they were almost as agile as some of the Negro ghosts basketball team. We had a nice basketball team, and they took a lot of interest in this. We traveled all through Cache Valley and Box Elder County and down into Ogden. The man whom was superintendent of the Sunday school later, very active, who went to the temple with his wife and who later fell away. I could name a number of them.
Is there anything that you would attribute to this falling away? Is there any reason?
I think it's a lack of activity, social activity.
When the Washakie project finally broke up, and from my information from Moroni and his son, that this happened during the war years, said that a lot of the people left to go work in military installations, factories, and so on and so forth, so that they could get a better pay.
This is true.
Do you have any contact today with some of the Indians that are scattered from Washakie down through the different communities?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you find them today in relation to their economic status as well as their social status?
Well, I think that there's no question at $2, this gradually increased as the economic situation changed. And when the war came on, the colonel from Hill Field called me one day on the phone and asked if we had any old folks or women or anyone that just could move packages around. I told him, yes, we had a number of them, and this was old folks, retirable age, who didn't have to work very hard but had to help in the warehouses. He came up, asked for permission, and we encouraged this, and came up and recruited a number of these folks. And of course, during the war, prices spiraled, and they were able to pay a higher price, and many of them did move, but some of them moved even before this. I remember the hospital here, where it's the Indian school in Brigham City. My friends left. I was getting a salary that was very minimum, and they left. Folks whom I had been used to receiving a higher salary than left and were able to pay yet 2 and 3 times more money per day than I was, and it took quite a bit from the church to keep me there. In fact, they almost said I was called on a mission to serve there, and I felt didn't have the freedom to leave that I normally would have had if it had been an average job. So it went in all fields. And of course, since that time, agriculture just hasn't been able to pay the price that industry and governmental installations. But these folks haven't improved, frankly, any of them, with 1 or 2 exceptions. Those who have been energetic and ambitious and frugal like Moroni and Henry. They haven't been trained long enough in these in principles of economics to raise their standard over a long period of time. They live high when they have it, and it's gone as soon as the job is over. This is one of the basic principles that we had hoped to establish there.
The Washakie farm itself, was it ever a paying venture?
Oh, yes.
By that I mean, was it able to carry itself?
Yes. Yes, the years I was there, all the years, there was a profit, I think.
Mm-hmm.
May not be, have not been the first year, but...
In the old days before the coming of the white man, the Shoshone...
Let me correct this statement. May I say, there was a profit, and from this profit, these homes that were built there. You're aware of the 2 cinder block homes and the 1 mud home and another home that had been started, the foundation, and had they have wanted to have lived in them, and there could have been a profit. There was no profit to the church. I want to straighten this out. If there had been any accumulation of monies, it would have been spent right back on this project.
In the old days, the Indians, generally, were used to living in communal societies, sharing things, functioning as a unit. I was wondering how they functioned as a farm when they gave up their lands to total community use. If this is something they went right into, or was it
no,
hard?
There's resistance.
Resistance.
The more aggressive people, of course, were easy. They were able to see that the less aggressive people wouldn't be anxious. They were contented with what welfare or assistance was passed out to them without very much effort. Moroni and Henry wanted to be on their own and enjoy the benefits of their labors. And they resisted the thing pretty much all the way through. Mm-hmm. Were never quite contented.
Was it ever to the extent of a communal society, to the extent of the United Order in LDS doctrine?
Here, never was here. Not in my day. I'd understood that. Well, never was, I suppose.
I see. In the period of time, and I guess ever since the Washakie project, you've been associated with the Indians of the area in one way or another. What is your general feeling about them now? Do you feel that they are making progress today?
Well, I think they're human beings like every other individual with the same emotions and tensions that we all have. I think that if there were just enough Indians, this is my sincere feeling, at Washakie, mixed in with the white people, that they could easily adopt white man's bad ways as well as these good ways. I spoke at Linford's funeral, and I made mention of this. If there were anything good the white man had, many of them adopted this, and if there's anything bad, the white men took advantage of them. This is one example I've often used. The Indian wasn't baptized and converted to the church, this group, as with all the good qualities that any man has. He'd been wearing a breech clout, and he'd had different ways, and they were baptized by the missionaries that come among them as a group on condition that they would live like a white man. And this didn't mean that they had ambition and were energetic and ready to go to work every day. I've been told that I.D. Zundel, the first bishop, had to go and get them out of bed, and after he did, they had, like my son that wants to get by without any work, they felt these inclinations, and he encouraged them to, and for a period of time, they had harvesters. They weren't called combine, they were called headers, and thrashing machines, and done a lot of work in the Bear River Valley, in the Malad Valley. But at the same time, there were a lot of them that felt, and they were contented to live in a shack and, in a sense, live on the county welfare program, and then sneak away once or twice a year and pick cherries here in Brigham or thin beets with the whole family and get by that way.
Was there any trust property? By that I mean property that was held in trust by the federal government at Washakie?
I know of none. It was all privately owned. And I don't know what you mean by trust. There were some that couldn't be sold, I were told, at the Hall Indian Agency.
Did the BIA agency at Fort Hall have jurisdiction over the Indians at Washakie?
In some ways. They subsidized the school district for some of the educational activities. I don't know whether it was all or part. But they insisted that the school district provide a noon lunch for the school children, and I think paid the salaries, part of the salaries at least, of the school teachers there. They insisted on a man and wife who should come and live and prepare their meal and do all the teaching.
What kind of a school system did they have at Washakie?
Well, it was supervised by the school district, county school district, the regular curriculum of all the schools in the county at that time.
How far did it go?
Well, it went 1 to 8 years, and then the kids left and went to high school. And these were the folks that Bishop Perry bused to the main route across the valley.
Mm-hmm. What high school was it that they were?
It was Bear River High School.
The project itself, in speaking with the two Indian fellows I mentioned before, felt in some instances that the total ownership of the property by the church was somewhat of a detriment to the total group. As I asked the question to them, would you go back to Washakie? Would you like to go back there and live and try to keep the thing going? And in both instances, the answer was yes, if the land could be owned by individuals and if the church didn't have the total land. Do you have anything, could you respond to that?
Yes, I think so. I can understand why they gave that answer. Moroni was aggressive, ambitious, and I think ownership meant something to him. He wanted to be able to work hard like the most ambitious white man, work and be his own boss. And he instilled this into his son Moroni, or to Frankie. And Frankie has property there now with his father. This is natural, I'm sure, with that disposition.
It was also mentioned that in some instances, when the older Indians were unable to make their own way, that the church would provide a welfare system for them. In other words, provide them with a monthly subsidy, and upon their death, the land would revert to ownership by the church. Do you know anything of this?
Well, I'm sure this was initiated way back when Indians were given a homestead or an allotment by the government. The church encouraged them to do this in the beginning. And when they were unable to do the farming, the Indians, I'm sure that those in authority at the ward there would make these kind of deals, that they'd care for them until their death, and then the ownership would go to the total project.
Can you remember anything of the older people was there much of a conflict or much of a problem in making a transition from being a nomadic, roaming people to becoming a farm people?
No, in the period of time that I think I lived there, I feel they all had a real urge from the beginning until I left to want to, row, yes, they'd go to Blackfoot to the celebrations there and all other activities in Idaho and everything from Washakie to Salt Lake whenever any community had a fair or a special celebration. They loved to go. But in between, to get money to do this, they delighted in working their squaws and the children and the whole family to get money, to thin beats, to top beats, and so on. They didn't want to be tied, any of them. Moroni doesn't even like that yet, even though he retired from a government job. And this is one thing I had in mind I wanted to mention to you a minute ago was when the Indians were encouraged to farm for themselves, we know of a number of instances where they would get an alfalfa seed crop ready to harvest. And it'd be all ready, and the white man's thrashing machine would be ready. They'd be ready to move it in to thrash. And the county fair would start. The Indian wanted to go to town and celebrate. And the white man said, no, we have to thrash today. I have other places I have to go. Well, in a sense, you can justify the white man, and in a sense, the Indian. Well, a deal would be made. Well, how much will you give me for the crop just as it is? Well, the white man very often, because of the Indians' emotions and desires to go and celebrate, would take advantage, and they wouldn't be aware of this. Might actually be aware, but wouldn't care much at the time, but later would regret that he'd sold the seed crop in the field for a sacrifice, and would come back and make accusations. These kind of things went on all the time, and it'd be very easy to do this. I saw this happen several times.
What were your responsibilities there as the farm supervisor in relation to the Indians? Did you have any kind of jurisdiction over them because of their living on and working on church land?
I took the attitude that here was a project, we would hire them, any one of them, any time they wanted to work. And it made it difficult at times because we had harvests already when the county fair we'd be depending upon them and find out because of the weather conditions and so on that we were all ready to begin a harvest of some kind. The county fair would begin and we didn't have any help. And then very often they would come back when we didn't need them and want to work, and we'd still put them to digging post holes or building buildings or something else. So I had no actual jurisdiction over them. It was the farm that I was to make pay. I was an agriculturalist. I had been trained this way and was told this was my responsibility, plus help build up their standards. And of course, I only had a church job in the Mutual, served on the Stake High Council. Of course, it was expected to encourage them whenever I could. Actually, I couldn't demand anything of them any more than I could the neighbors.
How many Indians lived there when you were supervisor?
I think, I was going to say 200, a little better than 200. I forgot.
And how many, can you give me an estimate of how many working men there might have been?
Oh, we would have at times a dozen men working or more that would report for work. We never, to my knowledge, ever told one they didn't have work. When they were ready to work, they'd come over with their gloves or whatever and say they're ready to work. They would watch sometimes. Some of them actually would watch and see what we were doing before they'd report to work.
What was that you were going to mention about the society in relation, our white society in relation to the Indians?
Well, I think, frankly, that our whole society helped spoil these Indians. I say this generally because there were many of them that are fine folks and some that are like a lot of white people. For instance, it was quite common for our county sheriff to call me on the phone and say, "Hey, I got one of your Indians down here in jail that I picked up drunk." Well, I'd say, "What do you mean one of my Indians? He's one of yours. Make him pay the penalty, like you would if you'd picked a white man. The white man doesn't belong to me any more than the Indian." And we took this attitude. The law enforcement people and the judge, and everyone seemed to think that here was a bad lot, that it was somebody's responsibility to take care of them. And this wasn't an easy thing to get the Indians to understand. That in those days they couldn't drink, and this made them separated a little bit. They wanted the privilege of doing what the white man done. At sometimes they were permitted to go ahead and live as married in an Indian way, and then other times somebody'd pick up a situation and carry it to the courts, and they'd try to judge them on the white man's regulations. And this would be difficult to understand by any man that would be living under those conditions.
Was the language of the Shoshone spoken quite extensively at the project?
Quite extensively by the older folks.
Mm-hmm. In 1939, when you first went to the project, it seems that there had been a period of time, a period of exposure for these people to white culture.
Very definitely.
And it seems that perhaps there might be a reason why they hadn't progressed further than they did in relation to accepting of the white man's ways. Did they try to perpetuate their Indianness? And by this I mean their ceremonies, their language, some of their customs.
I enjoyed to learn some of their ceremony and their Indian songs, and very often met with the women in the church, and they enjoyed trying to teach me many of those things, and I got a kick out of it. Even today, we took a group of Aaronic priesthood boys up there this last spring, and Moroni and his wife participated by telling of these things. They would have done, and would have done much better job if, I've said this, if they'd have been expected in many cases to do these things.
You feel in some instances that there wasn't enough expected of the Indians?
I'm sure this is the case. We sometimes would say, well, in many ways, both in the law of the land, well, he's an Indian, and just let him go. Mm-hmm. And we permitted them to do many things, yet on the other hand, we'd press them much farther than we would a white man.
Mr. Allred, you made mention that during your stay there at Washakie that some of the Indians that had left prior to your coming there would come back during the time that you were supervisor there. What was the general policy when the Indians would come back to Washakie?
We accepted them as though they'd been there all the time. In fact, the Pavouina family, I think, I don't remember whether it was two men with their wives, children, or three, actually came back and moved across the valley and settled on the springs there, and there's some old buildings that they patched up and began to live there, and we accepted them, provided them work.
What kind of housing did they have there? When a family would come back, where would they live?
The housing was deplorable, and this was the reason why the church was anxious that we provide a substantial, warm, heatable place. And this would be, I guess, provided for them free of charge as long as they stayed and were interested in working on the project.
Were there any houses or homes built while you were there as supervisor?
Yes. We built 3 homes and started the 4th. Have you been to the project?
Yes, I've seen some of the brick buildings.
See cinder block homes. Mm-hmm. 2 of them on the north, and the other one. The idea to begin with, as we started, was to try and teach them how to build. And we provided obtained a builder from Salt Lake who was teaching us and teaching the Indians, and actually while we were hiring them, we hired them at this going rate. And he was showing them he had a farm wherein we could pour moist clay and press it, and then stucco both inside and out, and would make an awfully warm building. This is what we began with. And the intent was to build these homes for the Indians just as fast as we could get around to them.
Who would pay for the materials?
Church.
The church would actually provide them with a home. We
provided all the equipment and paid the Indians to work on it, off from the proceeds of the farm.
What kind of participation did you get in the project?
Well, about equal to what we did all the way through. If they were back and ready to go to work, they'd come to work, maybe working on a building or maybe working out in the field hauling hay. We would decide that each day where they would work. We had a builder there, and he would work as many as we'd send to him.
How would you decide who would get the home?
This was done with the Bishopric and the High Council in the state, more or less on attitude and interest.
Mm-hmm. Did the Indians become very dependent upon the supervisor and the bishopric for their needs?
We realized this was true, and the county welfare and so on. They depended pretty much. The idea was to try and build them so that they wouldn't be dependent.
What was the general feeling of the general authorities of the church toward the Washakie project? And if any of the, can you name the general authorities that were involved or most concerned?
Yes. To begin with, we had President Smith, George Albert Smith, who dedicated the building and definitely was interested in Indians. He later became the president of the church. At the time, he was only a member of the Council of 12. We had President Clark, who came and spent one part of a day to look over the project, offer any suggestions he had. Very often we had Bishop M.O. Ashton of the presiding bishop's office used to come and stay at our home overnight many times, and many others. I don't know that we had any more of the Council of the 12, but these were the important.
What was their feeling about the project?
Well, they were anxious. They said, we have this project only for one purpose. Here's a source of income for these people if they will be willing to work and follow the suggestions that you have. Learn how to work and economize. They will have a clean, nice place to live and begin to live like the white man.
In the early beginnings, it was George W. Hill, I believe, that originally began the project.
Well, he was the first missionary that helped baptize them, as I understand.
Mm-hmm. And my question is, what do you think would have happened to this group of Indians, the followers of Sagwitch, if the farm or the project had not been started?
Well, this was actually a problem Brigham Young had. He talked about the Washakie Indians a time or two. He was anxious to locate them and find a place where they could adjust to the white man's ways, and he actually helped direct where they should go. Now, you recall, here was Lorenzo Snow at Brigham City at the time, operating on a United Order system. And they had actually started this project when they brought the water out of Idaho. and is known as the Brigham City Co-op, which was a farm type of a bank. And they agreed to let the Indians have this project, or buy it in a sense. And under the leadership of George Hill and then later I.D. Zundel, who became their first bishop, and under the direction, in a sense, of actually Brigham Young and Lorenzo Snow. They obtained this only for that purpose. If they hadn't had this in mind, the Indians could have moved on to another project. They realized the real need of keeping the Indians together for the support of each other and have them adjust to these new conditions.
Are you very familiar with the reservation situation of the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the reservations?
Not too well.
My question is, the Indians at Fort Hall received subsidies from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. They received many benefits from living on the reservation. I think there are probably some parallels that could be drawn between the Washakie project and the reservation period. It seems that in the Washakie area, the church, in fact, became the provider in many instances, tried to build them up, proceeding with the basic philosophy of teaching the Indian how to be independent, how to compete in the dominant society. The basic philosophy of the Bureau of Indian Affairs is the same. And apparently, neither one has been very successful. From your statements, there hasn't been a whole lot of improvement generally among the Indians. You did state some isolated cases of where we have some outstanding individuals. But generally speaking, the Indians that were at Washakie have not done real well. Generally speaking, we can say on reservations that the Indians haven't done real well. And would you see a change in philosophy here? Would you see a change in approach in dealing with the American Indian?
This is my personal opinion only. And I'm confident that the principle of teaching somebody to help themselves is all right, providing you get out of the way when they want to help themselves. I don't know. I think this is one of the criticisms I'd offer for the Bureau of Indian Affairs is they seem to keep the reins in the hands of a few and still trying to teach the Indians, the average Indians, to do this. Well, they have the intelligence, same kind of intelligence as anyone else. And very often they get anxious to move ahead and then we're in the way. The opportunities need to be there as well, and sometimes a strong individual doesn't have to have opportunities provided, only a chance of freedom, and then they'll make it themselves. And I'm sure this happens in all groups of society.
Do you think that perhaps the people that were running the Washakie project, I mean the church employed people, might have been guilty of the same kind of thing?
No, I felt, frankly, that they understood the principle. They've always understood this principle and tried to teach it to the church members at large, that they ought to learn to take care of themselves. Now, the church couldn't provide and give pieces of ground. This is what they had in mind originally, is provide it for them and then let them farm it. And they had a man there to teach them anything they didn't know. It's like an extension agent. Here's how to kill these bugs. Then let them do it. That was the intent. But when they had the leadership there that was willing to rent the land, well, they were contented to do the same thing.
Mr. Allred, could you evaluate in terms of the objective of teaching the Indians to be self-reliant, independent, evaluate your tenure there?
Yes, I think the objective was to raise not only the home conditions, the economic conditions of the home, the family, and we provided began to provide for them a home that we expected to be clean, food and clothing that they hadn't had, that hadn't been too plentiful before this. And of course, then as the economic conditions changed and jobs were available and higher prices, so on, they were able to get this elsewhere. But they haven't sought for nice, clean homes since that time. We had just begun something that was, I thought, really basic that didn't get completed.